Hey everybody, welcome to this AMV Topic video. I'm going to try to record these from time to time as I think of them, or as as they're kind of brought to my attention, as kind of happened this time around. But basically, this is going to be a space for me to just kind of rant, or not necessarily rant, I guess, but just talk about things in the AMV community or the AMV hobby medium that I find particularly interesting or that I have particularly strong opinions on. Keep in mind, please, none of this is prescriptive. So this is just one guy's opinion on certain things in the AMV realm. So don't take anything I say with, too seriously. But I did want to talk about this topic because it is something that over the years I have come to find myself having strong opinions on. It was brought up recently in Discord server I'm in by a friend and fellow editor of mine named Viva Fringe. He asked, when is the right time to use Twixtor? He may not ask that verbatim, but that was what he was asking, was when do I use Twixtor? So I think this is an interesting topic, and I would love to just kind of get my feelings on this out there. But before I do, it might help to just quickly explain what Twixtor is in case you're not familiar. So as you probably know, any video exists at a certain FPS or frames per second. In the case of anime, it's usually aired at 23 point, well, I may be wrong about this, but it's either aired or recorded or animated at 23.976 frames per second typically. There are a ton of different frame rates, and it might depend on where in the world you are. But usually if you're going to be editing with anime, it's at 23.976 frames per second. Could also be at 29.97, although that's a lot less common. But in any case, what that means is, a video is just a series of still images put next to one another and then run so that there's the appearance of motion. Most people know this and understand this. And what it means to be at 23.976 frames per second, let's just call it 24 frames per second for the sake of simplicity, is that every second there are 24 of those still images that basically flash by in a second and create that motion. Twixtor is a plugin for various editing programs. I think it's available for pretty much every popular consumer editing program at this point. But basically what it does is it takes an input video with a certain frame rate and it interpolates that up to a higher frame rate, usually 60 FPS. So if you have in the animation, if you have someone who's like, let's say they're waving their arm, the first still frame, his hand is here. The second still frame, his hand is here. And then there's let's just say there's a third where it's a little lower. So when you play all those real quick, it looks like he's waving his hand, even though there's motion in between that's missing. What Twixtor does is it tries to recreate those missing frames. So it uses AI to look at the first frame, look at the second frame, and then deduce that the missing frame in between those should have his hand somewhere like right here. And it basically animates that missing frame, or not animates, but it draws that missing frame and inserts it in between frames 1 and 2. So this is how you get additional frames in your animation. Assuming that I should say this is how you get your animation from a lower frame rate to a higher frame rate without natively having it at the higher frame rate. Twixtor has been in use in the AMV scene since I think the earliest video was 2008. There may have been some that came before that, but if so, I'm not familiar with them. The first one that I know of was an AMV called Ariga by Nostromo VX. And it's funny because as I was preparing to talk about this topic, I went back and decided to rewatch that video because I hadn't actually watched it in a while. And I was actually surprised to find that the version of that video that I had on my hard drive for the last 13 or 14 years was the 30 FPS version. It was released, like I said, back in 2008, and Nostromo at the time, he was kind enough to release a 30 FPS version alongside the 60 FPS version that he had created for the plebes like me who didn't have a strong enough computer at the time to play the 60 FPS version. So all this time I've only ever seen the 30 FPS version, so I went back and re-downloaded the 60 FPS version, and I was actually really surprised to find that it has held up in terms of the technicals. Like, it looks really good. The implementation of Twixtor in that video is quite impressive, given that it was one of the first AMVs, if not the first, to use it. And he basically had to kind of figure it all out on his own without too much, no other AMVers that I'm aware of had used it before, so he just kind of figured it out as he went along, I think, which is pretty cool. But since then, Twixtor has been within the AMV community, and I think every video after that Nostromo released, he used Twixtor on it. At the time, his use of it was mainly just to make the animation smoother. If you read the video description, he says that he was like, I always felt that normal animation just seemed off. It didn't seem smooth enough, is basically what he was getting at. He was like, then I discovered Twixtor, and so I decided to implement it into this AMV. And it's true. That is one of the kind of the side effects, or maybe even the end goal of a lot of Twixtor use, is to make the animation look smoother. And in his videos, he does it really well. He knows how to make it work, and it's true, his videos do end up looking a whole lot smoother as a result. Over the years, though, Twixtor has kind of become just another effect. And I think this is due to a lot of reasons. I think in general, the nerdier people like us who tend to like AMVs and video games and, all the latest tech, have kind of become a little snobbish about frame rate, especially if you get into the gaming culture, which I'm not even going to go there, but frame rate is something that is kind of understood across the spectrum of people who like nerdy, geeky things like AMV editors. So the fact that there's this tool that can bring something from a lower FPS up to a higher FPS is kind of in itself an attractive thing. So I think that's probably one of the big reasons that Twixtor has kind of become so prevalent among AMV editors. But I think it's also because there have been some really popular AMVs over the years that have used Twixtor pretty effectively. And I don't want to discount that. So Nostromo is definitely one of those editors. You may not know his name now, but back in the day, he was probably, I would venture to say, one of the all-time most popular AMV editors. So when he, brought this new tool to our attention, people took notice. But there's also another editor who I think may be more to blame. And his name is Lollygurjaj. If you don't know the name of the editor, then you will probably recognize the name of his most famous video, which is Into the Labyrinth. And again, I will post a link to that video in the description if you've never seen it. And I'll also play a little of it here as I talk. But this is actually, I love this video, just to be clear. I love this video. I love most of Lolly's works. And this video was another really successful implementation of Twixtor. But this video blew up, and it got popular enough where people started to kind of copy the style. And from there, just, I think, the damage had been done, so to speak, and Twixtor was kind of in the AMV editor consciousness where it wasn't already. Unfortunately, the side effect of this is that people have kind of come to see Twixtor as just this effect that they can kind of slap onto any video and assume that it's just going to make the video look smoother and better. I should say smoother and therefore better. That's, I think, the logic that most people think when they consider whether or not to use Twixtor. The thing is, though, it is not just like a button you push to apply to any given AMV or anime clip. In fact, I'll link this in the description as well. A lot of links in the description today, but Lolly Gurjaj ended up writing a kind of a guide on how to use Twixtor, and I've skimmed it several times. I tried reading it a couple times, but ultimately what you find as you start to go through this guide is, well, first of all, it's not something you can just put on any anime scene and call it a day. In fact, I can't remember the percentage that Lolly quotes in the guide, but it's something absurd, like 80 to 90%. He may have even gone up to like 95% of anime clips he has found don't really work, or Twixtor doesn't work on them. And the reason I think is partly because, well, maybe mainly because Twixtor I don't think was originally created to be used for animation. And animation kind of has its own, what's the word I'm looking for? Quirks. When you try to take some like video editing plugins or effects or whatever that were originally meant for live action and try to apply them to animation, you get a lot of weird kind of output when that happens, and Twixtor is no exception. So as you go through this guide that Lolly wrote, you just start to see like it requires really intense technical knowledge of not just your editing tools like After Effects or Premiere or whatever you're using, but also just knowledge of how video works. And he shows just how much work you have to do to get Twixtor to actually look like anything but crap. If you watch poorly implemented Twixtor AMVs, or if you've seen any, I should say, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I will here. I'll play just a few clips as I talk of kind of what I'm talking about. These are clips that I created myself from a Twixtor-like free alternative that does basically the same exact thing. But this is kind of what it looks like if you're just slapping Twixtor onto any given anime scene without doing a lot of tweaking and forethought on what scene you're using. It looks like crap. You get all these weird artifacts. You get this stuttery, weird motion that is like not exactly what you would expect from a 60 FPS source. Like, it rarely looks good. There are only certain scenes where you can just kind of apply it and it looks okay. For the most part, it straight up doesn't. So I think a lot of editors don't really realize this, and so they just kind of apply Twixtor and it ends up looking terrible. This ultimately, I think, points to a deeper problem in that a lot of people, which is an entirely different discussion that I'm not going to really get into here, that where people will apply effects just because in their mind they think it looks cool, but there's really not enough thought or care put behind them to actually have those effects contribute anything meaningful to the AMV. But it just looks so bad when it's done poorly. The thing is, interestingly, these artifacts that kind of pop up when Twixtor is poorly implemented can actually be used to your benefit if you're going for a certain look or style. And Lolly Gurjaj is actually a really good example of this. He, several years ago, he released an AMV with a German title that I'm not going to try to pronounce because I'm going to butcher it, where it's an AMV that's meant to be ugly and off-putting and violent and just really disturbing, and it's not meant to like be attractive in any way. It uses all these garish effects, and it's just really, really ugly. It's the best word I can think of. But the thing is, as part of that is these weird Twixtor transforms that normally you probably wouldn't want to see in an AMV, but because that's kind of the vibe, the look he's going for, they actually just blend in really well, and if anything, it just adds to the chaos of the video. I will put a warning: if you decide to check this video out, it is extremely gory, extremely violent, like one of the most unapologetically gruesome AMVs I'm aware of. And it also has a lot of flashing and seizure-inducing effects and stuff. So if you have any photosensitivities, I would stay away from it. But if you don't and you have the stomach for that kind of stuff, it is a really interesting video that you will probably never want to watch again after you watch it. But it is definitely worth watching once. So that's kind of one way where Twixtor can be used well, is by actually intentionally taking those artifacts and using them to your conceptual advantage. But most people aren't going to do that. Most people are just going to want their video to look smoother, in which case I would point you towards Auriga, which I mentioned already as a really good example of this. It works just fine without the Twixtor, but I will say that having grown up watching the 30 FPS version, and then just earlier today watching the 60 FPS version, I was like immediately like, oh yeah, I see why he did this. It looks really good. I think he put in the work to make it look good. And when it's done well, when the actual effort and work is put in, I think that smooth look can actually elevate the video higher than it would be normally. I will also say though, just personal preference, to me often 60 FPS videos can look a little weird, and it may just be because I'm so used to seeing like the 23, 24 FPS versions of anime, but it's kind of hit or miss. But Nostromo is an editor who does that really well. And I also want to point out another video of his that uses, where his use of Twixtor is kind of the third way I would say is the right way to use Twixtor, and that is to slow scenes down, or maybe it would be better to say to add the frames so that you have more of them to play with, which allows you to do some kind of cool things with like speed ramping and just generally just slowing scenes down well past what native 24 FPS scene would look like. Nostromo released a video in 2014 called Hidden Palace, may have been 2015, where no, it's 2014, where that was kind of like the point of that video, is he took all these scenes and he applied Twixtor and he like stretched these scenes out so far past what they would normally be, and I could say a lot about that video, and that might be a video that I eventually want to break down in like what makes it great or something, but it's just super interesting the way he uses Twixtor to like time remap all these scenes so that they're really, really slow. And it's just kind of the general vibe of that entire video. It's just this glacial pacing, and it works really well. So slowing down scenes is another really good way to use Twixtor. Unfortunately, I don't see most people doing that. In the Twixtor videos that I see, it's mostly just tacked on as an additional effect that ends up looking really crappy. So just to kind of recap, the three ways I would say where it's kind of appropriate to use Twixtor is one, I'll just go in the order I stated them. So one, if you want those weird artifacts to be a part of your video and you're able to integrate them in some unique way into your concept or kind of the tone you're going for, that's one. I think that would be really difficult to do, but who knows? It's been done at least once. So that's one way. Second way is if you do just want that smooth look to your video, I think that's a perfectly valid reason to use Twixtor, because it is kind of a preference thing. But if that's what you like, that's what you like to see. The only thing is, if you do it that way, you have to be prepared to put in a lot of work, and you have to be prepared to learn a lot of stuff in order to get it to work well. But when it's done well, I think it can help a video to look very good. So that's two. And then the third way is to slow down scenes. And this is actually the one way where, well, I guess the first way as well, but this way you can find scenes in order to do this that don't require much, if any, tweaks on your part, because there are certain types of scenes, which Lolly kind of spells out in his guide, that work just natively with Twixtor and don't require a whole lot of input or messing around with the variables or whatever the settings on your end. But those are typically scenes that have very little motion to begin with and already have kind of enough frames to work with where it's already kind of in slow motion, if that makes sense. So if you have an already slow motion scene that's animated at 24 FPS, that's a good candidate for a scene that would probably be very receptive to a Twixtor effect. Other than that, I don't know that I would recommend using Twixtor. It is something that is a little on the trendy side, but it's also something that I feel is misunderstood from an editing perspective. And I hope that this has at least stimulated some thought in you. If you have considered using Twixtor before, I think this is a good kind of place to start thinking about it from a more intentional perspective. And hopefully, if you do decide to use Twixtor, you're able to use it in a way that is better than, let's say, better than the average user. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me rant, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.